So we're actually talking at kind of like an interesting time. So you've just spent a real kind of significant period. I think it's 10 years, right? You just came back from Seattle in
From
Washington.
Seattle.
Yeah,
That's right.
and you're back in Tokyo. Tell us a little bit about that transition. What's it been like?
Transition. It's been great for me personally, and so from professional experience, so I was working for Microsoft in Seattle for 7 years, and then
Hmm.
now, I got a job in Slalom, and then back to Tokyo, and now I'm working for opening the office in Tokyo market. So it's just great. But
Hmm.
from culture perspective, so even though I'm originally Japanese, as you know, right? So I
Right.
grew up in Tokyo for 40, and then spent about 40 years in Tokyo,
Mm.
and I kind of built a professional career in Tokyo market or Japanese market. Then, got a chance to work in other country and then coming back.
Mm.
So there is a mix of surprise and there's mix of surprise and a little bit of nostalgia kind of thing. And,
Mhm.
and it ends up with
Sure.
a completely new experience to me, right? So that's my kind of quick summary about my experience.
Yeah, I think so many people can relate to that. So whether they're American and they're going back to America or Japanese coming back to Japan, I think many people have kind of found that almost like reverse culture shock or something.
Oh, that's right.
What
That's right.
what what for you what kind of stood out, when you kind of came back? Maybe it was in social culture, but maybe it was even in business culture. What kind of stood out for you as those kind of big differences that you came back and you thought, "Oh, I forgot about this," or "Oh, this is different."
Yeah, so the first thing I noticed is that how much I'm so westernized, or there's so much
What does that
Americanized.
mean? Tell us,
So
tell us.
what does that mean? I'm more casual, and
Mhm.
so whenever I talk to friends, clients, whoever, then
Mhm.
I wear casual, so I wear jeans, and then so I wear
Mhm.
casual, clothes, and then so everything I do is more casual than what used to be in Japan.
Mhm.
So that's one. And then the other one is that, so I don't want to talk about anything sort of negative, or I don't want
Mhm.
to talk in negative way, but one
Mm.
thing I'm surprised, a little, quite surprised when I
Mhm.
came back to Japan is that, so last 10 years, there has been so much changes in the United States,
Right.
from technology standpoint, service
Absolutely.
standpoint, and even political standpoint, many changes. But I was kind of a little bit surprised that, how little the change happened in Japanese market or in Japan.
Mm.
So that was actually a biggest surprise to me. So in a good way, but in a kind of a little bit negative way. So how the people were using technology.
Mhm.
I actually see the big gap between the States and in Japan.
Mhm.
We I quickly noticed that there is an opportunity for business to
Mhm.
bring more technology to Japanese market for sure. So
Yeah.
that's one kind of takeaway.
Yeah, I can only imagine. If we go a little bit deeper into the technology side of things, and as you said, because of the perhaps lack of adoption, that actually does translate into a real kind of opportunity. What kind of concrete opportunities do you see in the IT market, particularly in Japan, that you're talking about?
Yeah, so I think that the one big kind of surprise or
Hmm.
the kind of aha moment to me
Mm.
when I first came back to Japan last year
Hmm.
was, as you know, so in the United States,
Hmm.
technology is the center of the business already,
Right.
right? So any business, it doesn't really matter if it's manufacturing or retail or whatever industry is,
Hmm.
healthcare or government even.
Hmm.
So the technology is always the center of the business.
Hmm.
But in Japan, I think there isn't that perception or the understanding, so technology is the kind of side, so kind of so different part of the business, or they,
Hmm.
different, people kind of think technology can be used for business, but for, improvement or the,
Hmm.
so bring some efficiency out of the technology. So that's the way how technology is perceived in Japanese market.
Hmm.
But in the United States, people are thinking like technology can change the way how we live or how
Hmm.
we work and how we do the business.
Hmm.
So that is, I think that's a huge difference between US market and Japanese market. Yeah,
Hmm. Absolutely. I think that's such an interesting point that you said, that really the technology, no matter what industry that you come from, that every business in a
right.
way is a technology business. Whereas in Japan, maybe this mindset is perhaps new. If we think, I've recently heard a comment that digital transformation and this kind of implementing technology for the business is not a CEO or is not a CIO job, but a CEO job. And very often in Japan, we kind of think about technology, we immediately put it in the IT department. But actually, we can really start thinking about using technology as a leverage tool, as a management tool, as a tool for talent. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. So, uh, Slalom is in very early stage of market, so market opening in Tokyo
Hmm.
market, but so we got a chance to, uh, luckily we have a chance to work with many Japanese clients in
Hmm.
last 2 years,
Hmm.
and every time we talk about whatever digital transformation,
Hmm.
technology enablement, it so everything ends up with uh, cultural transformation or organizational transformation or people
Right,
transformation. So that's
right.
what's happening. So it's about mindset. It's about how you think
Mm.
about yourself, or
Hmm.
it's about how you think about your business, right? So we are not starting from technology,
Hmm.
there are many great technologies so data analytics, AI,
Right.
cloud services, all those so
Hmm.
people knows about that, but
Right.
how they're going to be able to use that
Hmm.
for evolving their business
Hmm.
is always starting from how you like to live or how you like
Hmm.
to do so that's really the way how we kind of structure a
Hmm.
discussion with any customers at this moment.
I think that's so interesting. So often when you speak to technology professionals, or let's put it the other way, so often when you speak to
Yeah,
non-technology professionals, they'll say things like, "Yeah, AI and blockchain and cloud technologies," and like they'll begin with the technology. But
yeah,
when you actually speak to technology professionals that deeply understand how technology is a tool, it's so funny that every time technology professionals begin with mindset and people and culture, whereas the other people begin
that's
with the
right.
technology.
That's
Can you
right.
talk to us a little bit more about that perhaps what kind of mindset shall we call it? Like a digital mindset? Can you talk to us a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, so I think you know the Japanese society or the traditional Japanese culture really shine. So
Mm-hmm.
should shine in digital age, I think. So that's my perspective. So I can explain why.
Mm-hmm.
So digital shouldn't start from digital. So digital shouldn't start from technology, right? So
Right.
it's all about our life,
Mm.
our work. So what you like to experience or
Mm-hmm.
what you like to do or what you like to know, so all the things so how you how you try to capture information today is so much different than 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
20 years ago we don't have Google, or we had a
Right.
Google but
You
not in a
forget.
way that,
Yeah. You're right.
yeah,
Yeah. Not
right.
like it
So
is
like
today.
30
Mm-hmm.
years ago, 30 years ago, we didn't have Google. So we go to library and then we
Yeah.
go to, we go to newsstand and then get the
Mm-hmm.
newspaper and then read the news. So that's how we lived 30
Mm-hmm.
years ago. But now, so everything is digital. You know, every time I would like to get some information, so I go to Google or I
Mm-hmm.
go to news site and then so I can instantly get the most updated news.
Mm-hmm.
But so there's fake news, there is something wrong, and
Right.
then so maybe too much information that we can't digest. And
Mm-hmm.
then how we like to live better in digital age is really, we have to think about, we have to rethink how, what is the life in digital age. So that's really
Mm-hmm.
the starting point. So, think about that. So anything you like to do right now, then you have to, your client is going to be either way dealing with digital media or
Mm,
digital channel, right? So,
right.
so so as an engineer or as a tech person, you really have to think about how your system would be used by consumer, or how your system would be part of the big, kind of, society, like, so you really have to think about that. Otherwise, so it's going to be just a tool, which maybe doesn't really make any sense for anything, right?
Hmm. Hmm. I love that. And I love how 15 minutes into the conversation, we're already talking about changing society. I love
Yeah.
it. Um, I if we think about this kind of mindset, you can almost imagine how difficult it is to build a mindset that maybe you've never seen. So if we think about maybe the Japanese C-suite, like the typical Japanese C-suite, where you spend a lot of your time, connecting and listening to the challenges. How do you go about introducing this kind of new mindset? How do you support your clients in giving them the courage to even change, to think about
Mm,
changing?
mm, mm. I think, Brittany, so you also kind of experienced when you came to Japan for the first time, but I think the one reason, or the one thing we always try to stimulate CX level
Mm.
person is that be creative. Be creative meaning that
Mm.
try to be creative and then think something really new, like
Mm.
which doesn't exist in the market, or which you never ever thought about so far, right?
Mhm.
So what I mean is that Japanese education system is great for uh, you know um, creating people
Right.
who is really kind of diligent and
Mhm. Process
effective,
oriented, yeah.
process oriented, and
Mm.
well educated in a way that there's something coming from the top, and then just follow that, and then be very effective in a defined work, or the
Mhm.
kind of predefined work, right? So
Right.
but right now, so everything is changing so fast, and so we have to be creative, like so that's really that's always a starting point of any discussion with CXO level person, like be
Right.
creative. So be creative, it can go to many different, many different type of discussions. So like,
Mhm.
so many different variations. But
Mhm.
I think that's really the way how we try to stimulate six level person for digital transformation discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And then really beginning with that creativity. One thing that I found
Yeah,
particularly in like a Japanese C-suite is that if you can encourage creativity in collaboration or in community, it's even better. So rather than, for example, having
yeah,
one manager saying, this is what we should be doing, if you can encourage a whole team or a whole department to learn and to be creative, I found that that also tends to help also the manager be a little bit more, or to that leader be a little more courageous in the kind of decisions they make. Do you also see that if we think about creativity, do you also see maybe a role for community also when we're thinking about
sure, sure,
implementing
sure.
technology?
Yeah, yeah. So creativity is always coming out of interaction with people. Like, so I think one big thing still missing in Japanese society is
Mm.
about diversity. Like, so like
Oh, wow.
here,
Yeah.
Brittany,
Hmm.
like, so you're coming from Australia
Right.
originally, and so I have experience in two different markets.
Hmm.
We have to have more diversity in our society, because
Hmm.
I notice almost every time I notice Japanese company, all so only think about, most Japanese company only think about Japanese market or
Hmm.
Japanese people, like
Right.
so the people who has Japanese culture background.
Hmm.
But once you have people coming out of different countries such as Australia, India, China, United States, even, blue collar. So, so just take a kind of simple example. what does blue collar mean is very different by country, right?
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so those perspective or the kind of understanding the different perspective is really important to be more creative. Like so even though it's useless in Japanese market, it could be really useful for other countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then creativity coming in, like so how we can package this product in a different way. The product itself doesn't change, but
Mm-hmm.
if you can effectively repackage that product, then that product can be sold in a very different way in other market. So that's about a create. So that's what I call it as a creativity.
If we think about diversity, it is a new conversation in Japan, isn't it? Particularly at the
Yeah.
CXO level. What how can we perhaps frame diversity in a way that also we can perhaps also then build the business case for technology?
So take an example of uh, mobile app. Mobile app
Mm-hmm.
meaning that so you like to launch new service for using mobile app,
Mm-hmm.
then you'd probably need to design UI on the
Right.
mobile, right? So
Mm-hmm.
then when you do that, then you have to start from customer experience, like so
Mm-hmm.
what this icon mean, or what this window
Mm-hmm.
mean, or how this experience goes to these people or different people. Then so when you think about that, then how people are reacting
Mm-hmm.
is very different by country. So that's my experience. Like so
Mm-hmm.
just put that so like just put the prototype to different type of person, and then try to observe how they are going to use that prototype. Then
Mm-hmm.
so you'd probably see many different versions of reaction or the kind
Mm-hmm.
of customer behavior. So I think that's one kind of practical way of kind of visualize what the difference is or what the
Mm-hmm.
diversity is. I think the key is any CXO level person needs to
Right.
experience it or needs to
Mm-hmm.
see it
Mm-hmm.
practical way,
Absolutely.
very practical way, not just on paper. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really the key. Yeah.
If we then maybe even take a little bit of a step back and we think about before you came to Japan and you were in Seattle and you had the opportunity to then open this kind of, Japanese market, what was the motivation at that time to then go into Japan? Because obviously we know Japan has, its challenges, but at the same time, those challenges, when kind of reframed, really are opportunities. How did you make the decision that this was the time to then open up into this new market?
Yeah. So great question. Thank you. Thanks for asking about that. So the reason why I have passion to launch Japanese market for Slalom is that so traditionally Japanese market, Japan has respect the craftsmanship or monozukuri in Japanese,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
the monozukuri kind of craftsmanship culture still resides in Japan,
Mm-hmm.
but only for the physical assets or physical
Mm-hmm.
thing. Like so
Right.
so I use this glass all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I've been using this glass, my glass. So this is made by Kaneko Megane, and then so made in Sabae. The Sabae is one of the kind of famous place for kind of manufacturing the sort of the premier level the glass
Mm-hmm.
in the world market, in global market, right? So we still maintain the kind of premier level or the kind of exceptional level of craftsmanship for hardware things or the physical
Mm-hmm.
things,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow Japanese culture doesn't have respect to software. So what that
Mm-hmm.
means is that if we can help Japanese companies to be more respectful or to be able to use software technology in a way that so like craftsmanship, Japanese craftsmanship way,
Right.
then Japanese enterprise company or any Japanese company can can shine again in global market. in a different
Mm-hmm.
way, in a whole different way. Like, so now, what is the big difference compared to US market? So US companies or other, so companies in other market is that, especially, so companies in the West Coast in the United
Mm-hmm.
States, they are great. So they are great in software engineering, but they
Right.
are not still really great for hardware, but they are catching up. But
Mm-hmm.
now what's happening in the market, in any market, is that there is a marriage of hardware and software. So that's a new way of, so how we build a product. Then,
Mm-hmm.
so then when you look at the Japanese market or Japanese enterprise company, then so there is still exceptional level of hardware engineering in manufacturing all the,
Absolutely.
right? But there's kind of a gap in the software engineering side. So
Mm-hmm.
if we can help this software engineering side, then so Japanese companies can really exceed any other companies in global market, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
so that's my so that's where my motivation is coming from.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. And I hadn't thought about it in the way that you had framed it. That if we think about,
Mm,
we often hear when it comes to Japan, the challenges, and I feel that if you're in the market, we know the challenges. We know that Japan is years behind in terms of like digital transformation. We know that. But at the same time, if we reframe, as you said at the very beginning of the conversation, rather than kind of taking the negative route, let's kind of reframe it and then look at this as an opportunity. What kind of opportunities do we have? Well, we've got an economy and we've got a society that does something really well that actually we could translate into software. So if we think about, and I was reading recently that software development, kind of complex software development, is
mm.
less kind of that left brain analytical logical work, and it's more that right brain where you need creativity and imagination. And if we think about, a manufacturer making, for example, glasses for the very first time, like handmade glasses, or as you still see sometimes in Japan, handmade leatherware, things like that. This is actually a similar. This is a similar story to a software engineer who's sitting in front of a blank screen and really beginning at zero. So if we do kind of change that mindset that software actually can be Monozukuri. And if we think about Monozukuri is a strength of
Yeah,
Japan, then it sounds
yeah.
like that gap could be closed. Is that what you're saying?
It is. Like, so you can feel you can feel authenticity in
Mm,
any, kind of premium level kind of so hardware things, so made by Japanese, right? So
hmm.
kimono or glass or
Right.
whatever. But I don't think, so I can't really feel there is authenticity or the respect for authenticity in software engineering in Japanese market.
Hmm.
Like, so what that means is that, it's about, you know, the excellence of UI designs or
Right.
excellence of, the
Yeah, of
architectures, all
course.
those, you know, there are many experts in US market, so they are rewarded, for the work that they do. And then, so
Hmm.
I think we have to have that in Japanese market too, the respect the authenticity in software engineering,
Hmm.
and then so marry that authenticity to hardware engineering, right? So then, we can kind of raise the bar for Japanese industry, and
Right.
then, so I think we can coming back to global market again.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because the last kind of couple of years we've been like kind of reflecting on the Japanese market, and we're looking at actually the traditional Japanese companies, as you mentioned, having a standard of excellence. Um,
Yeah,
Tend to have perhaps more of the values of the digital age, what's required in a digital age, than maybe the companies of kind of, let's say, the 90s or the kind of 2000s.
right,
Another one
right.
of those things, for example, was if we think about global collaboration, if we think about kind of, in the Meiji period, right? If we think about
Yeah,
those companies that, as Japan started opening up again, they just put their people on boats or planes and said, go to America or go to Asia and have a look around and see what they're doing and come back and tell us. So I think there's also this element of global collaboration and perhaps openness as well that also might be that Japan actually did once very well. They did once very well,
It
and then
is. It is.
somehow we lost it a little bit along the
Somehow.
way. Yes.
Yeah. So one example for the last conversation. So, you know, you talked about, quality. So like, so quality is always a topic with any Japanese clients all the time. Like, so we are supporting, agile transformation, digital transformation. Then,
Mm-hmm.
how you think about quality is,
Mm-hmm.
so always like, so when we ask, so when we first meet, any clients, any Japanese
Mm-hmm.
clients, and asking question like, how do you think about quality? Then they are talking about defect rate or the
Right.
failure rate. So
Right.
very traditional way, but
Mm-hmm.
how we think about quality in digital age is so much different. We measure customer satisfaction, we
Right.
measure customer experience,
Mm-hmm.
we measure retention rate. So all those
Mm-hmm.
are considered as a quality measure in
Mm-hmm.
digital age, which doesn't really exist in traditional age, right? So
Mm-hmm.
in hardware age, right? So in hardware, it is very important for sure, like failure rate. So if plane is crashed, that's a big problem. So
Right. And
we
of course, the
we
automotive
still have
industry
to
as
maintain
well.
that.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
is, it
Safety.
is.
Yeah.
But so think about digital. It's
Mm.
different. How you
Yes.
define quality. So you really have to coming back to that discussion for the first time, and then you can start thinking about how you can adapt digital age in
Mm.
a new way of thinking. Like,
Mm.
just take an example of quality. It's really different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If we think about that as in we're trying to have a conversation with our clients that if in order to m- put a metric on quality, what we need to do is first then map experience, right? We have to understand, well, this is the experience, and then in order for us to say if it's good or bad, and then we can kind of have our
Yeah.
quality metrics. How do you go about having these very intangible kind of conversations with clients, because they're looking for answers, right? And and often as digital transformation specialists or we're people who work in innovation, often the answer is it depends, right? It
It
depends. And
depends.
this
It
kind of drives
depends.
customers crazy. How do you help them through this kind of intangible world, but at the end of the day still trying to achieve those very tangible results, as you said, like customer
Right.
satisfaction?
Yeah. So, so I know, so you've been working for those kind of things all the time. So you have your answer on that. But, so my answer to any of those in any of those situations is that talk to people as many as you can. So that's my answer for so for those people. Get the perspective, get the different perspective, and then try to shape how you think about that. Like, so I'm not giving any answer, any direct answer to them.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, I've asked them to connect with the people because, now what's happening is that everything is changing. The
Mm-hmm.
weather,
Mm-hmm.
the COVID-19, all those,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
really have to listen. You really have to talk to people. Otherwise, you won't be able to know. You won't be able to understand what's really happening and what is it, what's going to be the future. Like, so that's my kind of quick answer, quick, 30 minutes answer to anybody.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. It really comes down to connecting with people and trying to understand what's going on, because Japanese companies particularly tend to be quite complex, in terms of who's responsible for what and things like that. It's not so clear. So the more that we can kind of understand from the people perspective inside the organization what's going on, perhaps that's even a way that we can support them even better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If we then start thinking about this, as you mentioned, just quickly, COVID-19, if we think about the last, those of us that have been working in innovation or even digital transformation have heard the word digital transformation in Japan, or DX, as the Japanese like to call it. We've heard this for years, right? We've heard it for years, how important it is. And yes, we should be doing something. But it hasn't been until really overnight almost that organizations had to had to turn on a dime really, and then kind of enable, remote working spaces. If we think about this kind of world that we now live in, as much as we have a lot of uncertainty and we have, incredible challenge, at the same time there is incredible opportunity. What are you most excited about in this kind of post COVID, more digital, we're a little more digital friendly world?
Um, Great question. um, uh, so let me start off with my, the observation right now, like, so what's happening, and so what is my conversation with our clients, like, so I'm starting to notice many changes in Japanese market.
Hmm.
So that, so we have a chance to talk to many different type of clients, and now people finally realize, we have to change. So
Right.
I think that's a good sign. But the stage where we are right now in Japanese market is that we notice that, but we don't know how to do it. Or,
Right.
so we don't know where is the destination, right? So, so I just want to say, like, so be collaborative, or, so try to think something crazy, like, so don't create any boundaries when we think about something. So,
Hmm.
so that's my kind of, personal kind of perspective about, so whenever I talk to new customers, or whenever I talk to my, existing customers, or my friends, even my friends,
Mm.
how I, try to organize is that, so try to be way more creative than so, so than ever. And then
Hmm.
also not to create any boundaries when we talk to people. So
Hmm.
I think that will help us to, you know, accelerate our changes and innovations.
Mm.
So, but that's really the key. And for
Hmm.
younger people, so especially for younger people, so because I have a passion to, support younger people. So,
Hmm.
as a last word, so you know, go to any countries other than Japan and experience it, and then,
Hmm.
be able to speak in English and in other language as well. Like, try to get more diversities and experience it. So I think that's really the key.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. So if we think about being able to, and this then also kind of gives us a little bit of an idea what kind of talent that then these companies are really going to need. So if you can then,
Yeah.
as you know, as you mentioned, go out and be creative and don't worry about, kind of traditional models, just go and kind of do something crazy. This is actually kind of that next digital age of talent, and hopefully that they'll be able to lead that kind of change that we see in Japan.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and if we think like on the as kind of a last question, a looking back but also looking forward question, what's kind of the Japan in 5 years that you'd love to see? So if you say the last 5 years, we committed to digital transformation, we committed to diversity. What's the kind of Japan that you would love to see in, say, 5 years from now? So
Ah,
2026.
okay. 2026. I love to see at least, 100 more companies are coming back to global market.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's my kind of dream.
Hmm.
So, what that means that, let me kind of tell you a little bit about my history. Like, when I was working for my previous company, Microsoft, when I joined Microsoft had 10 or maybe 15 Windows personal computer manufacturers
Hmm.
in Japan, only in Japanese market. But
Hmm.
now there isn't so many, right? So, so the PC manufacturing has been moving to Chinese companies, or so US based companies. And so 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Toshiba was number two or number three in PC market. But
Hmm.
now who is on
Yeah,
the list, right?
we don't
So
see them. Hmm.
that's really so that was my experience in the industry. Like, so when I first started my career in, previous company, then, so I was able to manage 10, 15 different Japanese Windows OEMs. But now everything is gone.
Mm.
I would like to see them coming back to the market.
Mhm.
So that's my dream, and I think it could happen in the next 5 years if
Mhm.
we really kind of focus on digital transformation and then try to, so kind of try to converge everybody's energy to kind of let's get real transformation. So I think we can make it.
Mhm. And on that note, I think that's a really exciting goal to have. And it just
Yeah.
sounds like, yeah, it just sounds like that, the only thing that we have to do is kind of, ganbarimashou, to, you know,
So.
to make that happen. So this
Yeah.
is the end of our English episode. Whoever would like to then listen further on to our Japanese episode, we will now head into our Japanese episode. So Ryuta, thank you so
Okay.
much for joining firstly in our English
Thank
episode.
you.